So I'm delighted to welcome you all to our latest Speakers Corner event. There are many new names and faces on the call from all over the world today. So we've got a truly international audience. So on behalf of Innovate Ireland, I'd like to offer a very warm welcome to our network and to this event. So that you are aware, we are recording this for our YouTube channel. So you will be able to listen to the conversation again if you want to revisit any of the points that have been discussed. And I hope that's okay with everyone. So many of you are members of the Innovate Ireland community and regular visitors here, so it's good to see you all again. And for the first time visitors, as I've said, you're all extremely welcome. So my name is Charlie Tuxworth. I've been in the innovation space, if you like, in one form or another for most of my career. And I'm one of the co-founders of Innovate Ireland. So Innovate Ireland is a collaborative network that had its roots in a whole range of coffee shop meetings between a bunch of like-minded individuals, sort of filling in gaps between other meetings that we had. We would meet up, drink way too much coffee and swap our innovation stories and our challenges. And these meetings provided really a safe place for us to discuss, complain and share ideas. And we realized that there was little or no support in place for those that wanted to implement innovation in established organizations. So eventually this led to the creation of Innovate Ireland. And we are the all-Ireland go-to community for practitioners, advocates, and explorers of innovation. And we share some great content. Some best practice and thought leadership, and we're representing our membership at a national and international level. So on to today's event. We know that companies don't innovate. It's the people that do the innovation, and that they do it by collaborating and communicating. And rather than stealing his thunder, which I did last time we took this approach, I'm going to hand straight over to Owen Flavin, who will then tell you a little bit more and introduce today's very special guest, who I'm delighted is here. So Owen, over to you.
Thanks, Charlie. Charlie is very thorough and professional, so he tends to actually explain the important points, whereas I'm going to do something far more selective, which will leave Magnus feeling far more humbled than he should be. But Magnus is my friend, is a colleague globally in the world of ISO and standards. And he's a trusted colleague. And he's trusted by me, but he's trusted by the whole world to wrestle with alligators. Him and his secret weapon, Linnea, who we may be seeing during the hour. And I think actually Linnea is part of the reason that he wrestles with these alligators so successfully. But in his job as convener of ISO TC 279 WG2, God help us all, his job is no less than to produce crystal clear communication basis language for all of us innovation professionals and organizations. No problem. But no better man to be doing it, as we might say in this island. Magnus, over to you, and I'll put the slides up as we start.
Brilliant, thank you. So for those who didn't hear that in the beginning, I got a 4-year-old in the background, and she has been joining ISO meetings internationally for the since her birth. And today she's sick to the stomach, so that might be the funky background sound. She's potentially well right now. She's got some candy, and hopefully I can focus. So let's hope for that. So I got 20 minutes to talk, and let's see how that works out. And if I'm talking way too fast, I might be energized on way too much coffee today as well. Just do like this. Hopefully I'm not speaking too loud as well. Now, my topic today will be communication language, essential for effective innovation. No, really, we're using the word innovation wrongly in the title. That's done completely on purpose because we wanted to communicate to you what you would potentially understand. Because and that kind of relates to when you communicate, there's a sender, there's a box of misinterpretation, and there's a receiver. So we focus on what you might most likely understand to be more correctly to attract you to join. And to succeed in innovation, well, we need to make sure that people understand what we're talking about. Now, before we start doing anything, we should know what it is and be able to communicate what it is. A precise language is the backbone of good communication, and culture is built on 2 seconds. I know she wants attention. Det går bra, Linnea. Du kan bare la det ligge. Sorry for that. It's fun having kids joining in. So I don't know if you're here, but she wanted to know what to do with the paper from the candy. As I was saying, and culture is built on, to rewrap so you're all back online, a precise language is the backbone of good communication, and culture is built on shared language, shared beliefs, and shared behavior, which is the definition of culture. And culture is one of the principles of good innovation management practices, well, at least as part of the ISO 56002, which is a standard on innovation management system. How can you structure your work on innovation within an organization or a company? So first we need to know, what is innovation for me, for you, for anybody, and for all? And the easiest would be to establish a fundamental understanding of what it is, and then start cooperating and innovating. Because if you do not understand what it is, how can we cooperate? And I have a really interesting example. When we started out actually before the ISO work, where we're trying to harmonize the meaning of innovation, we started out in Europe with a work on innovation management as well. And in one of the last meetings, people were quarreling from all over Europe. And I just said, okay, time out. All of you guys are completely aligned. You mean the same, you're just using different language. Let's please start with terminology. And that's how we ended up starting out with the terminology project in innovation, and where we really saw the essence of having a precise language to be able to communicate even between experts. You can move to my slide number 3, I think. You jump the introduction of who I am, and then to the next one. Excellent. So what you see on the screen now is that any words or concepts related to innovation, which people have a tendency to mix, and we have a joint understanding they might be similar or different, but we use innovation for all of those. And then how can we be precise? How can we, when we communicate to colleagues or to the public or whoever, be precise and make sure that people understand what the hell we're talking about? We need to clear out the mess. We could bring out the meaning and the essence of terminology. We could even start out really back in time. We could start out with the biblical tale of the Tower of Babel. The king Nebuchadnezzar was trying to build a tower to reach his God. Let's say that is the Tower of Innovation. But the God didn't like that. And in order to stop that, he did only one thing. He introduced languages with the imminent result that cooperation, communication, and interoperability cease to exist at once. And the mighty Tower of Babel came crashing down, and people were spread around the world, meaning no more communication, no cooperation, no innovation, no nothing. And then we have to restart. That's the purpose and the meaning of a joint terminology. Without it, we cannot communicate, we cannot cooperate, and we can't do anything because we just miscommunicate, even though we would potentially even be aligned and agree. It's defined different by many user groups and practitioners and researchers, which is a problem. So when you are in the domain of research, it has one understanding, by practitioners one, and in the general public and those the practitioners would like to work with, or in the general public, they have a different one. And then we have to add the last one, which would be the governments and those doing statistics, measuring how much do we invest in this, how does it work? They got a different understanding. And now, what does that do? Well, it creates problem. So the lack of a common, there's somebody trying to join. So the lack of a common language is hampering implementation, assessment, communication, and collaboration. And there's really a need for a common language and a shared understanding of what innovation is and how it can effectively be managed. But we really do not manage innovation at all. 2 seconds. Okay, I need to do backup plan 4. We need to assist a little one. What did that one? Hold in there. Hold in. She wanted the assistance with the iPad. So now moving back. Where were I? Yeah, so we are not managing innovation because innovation is something specific, but we're managing processes and activities, and that makes more sense. It makes it more easy, which means that innovation must be some sort of an outcome. I'll get back to that in a second. It's all about, when we talk about language, it's about demystifying innovation as it divides groups and makes it really difficult, as you know, to communicate. And we end up with, well, really not innovating at all. The word innovation is like magic dust, which we kind of sprinkles on top of everything and anything. And we think, no, we're innovative, like setting up an innovation room, but we're really talking about somewhere we could be creative. This is something completely different than innovation. I'll get back to the definitions in a second on the next slide, but not yet. But it's not. But it's not really magic at all. It's even something we could structure. And now I'm not talking about innovation as a result, but it's innovation as a management or management system. That part we can structure, and there's a logic to the chaos, and we can address that. And that's where innovation management enters. And we could draw from experience of implementing processes and systems in business. But it's relevant to know what we manage. We do not manage innovation. We manage activities and processes, which would mean innovation activities, innovation processes, and within that we have projects or innovation projects or innovation initiatives. And now you could hear that I'm building up some sort of structure, which making my communication more precise. So what we're managing is project initiatives and activities within something may be somewhat planned process or another ad hoc process, but we're still managing it. And the core of all of this would be efficient language and precise definitions. 2 seconds. Need to make sure that the little one is attended to. Linnea. 2 seconds. Just making backup plan 2 efficient. That is smarties. Always works. And then I need to backtrack myself. Well, what we also need to do, we need to be able to measure to know if we are efficient. But we do. What do we measure? Do we measure the innovation? That's not really precise. Do we measure investment in activities or the impact of the result, which would be the impact of the innovation in society? What do we really measure? That is also something we need to agree on. And that's when we started with the ISO work I led. We started out with a few countries, ended up with 65 countries. And from ISO, we started cooperating closely with the OECD and NESTI, which is their working group for scientific indicators. And we made sure that ISO and the OECD merged our understanding like this. So we're on the same page on the management side of what we do and what we measure. And we agreed, and you can go to my next slide, that innovation is an outcome, meaning it makes sense to use the word innovation activities because innovation activities create innovation. And if you have a sequence of planned or unplanned activities, you have an innovation process, which you could manage, which is part of an innovation management system. Now, what is innovation? What we agreed with the OECD and also within ISO is that innovation is something new or improved, but what is essential is used, is adopted, and it generates value. But value is not only financial, it could also be any other kind of value, meaning it could be something ethical or something saving the society, which is essential. But when we cooperate with the OECD, we needed also to make sure that the definition makes sense from a statistical perspective and from a management perspective. And the OECD, they measure activities. So they don't have the exact same definition, but it's both from the same basis. I have a few links in the end where you can find the relevant documents. So that's some of the takeaways. But when ISO said it's something which is succeededly being implemented and generated values, the OECD stops before it's implemented, saying, we just looked at whatever activities you've done up to the point you present it to the market, and we measure those activities. And then they have to stop, because if it's a success or not, that's completely irrelevant. But from the management perspective, that is relevant. Now you see why it's relevant to focus on language as precise definition, because we need to watch the efficiency, the investment, because we're reporting to governments, and the governments, they look at the innovation system, which is kind of what your organization is part of. That's where all the support structures enters as well. Now let's take the example of you guys ask 10 colleagues of how do they understand innovation? You'll end up with more questions and answers of what innovation is than there's people in the room, which is a huge problem. And it's obvious that innovation terminology is essential to be efficient. You can move to my next slide. And also to make it easier to understand what innovation is all about, we put up a slide which shows you there's kind of 4 factors which is relevant. One would be the degree of newness, which relates to incremental, which is the low degree of new, to the radical, which is a high degree of new. And then there's different kinds of innovations. And the degree of value generated is not really linked to the degree of new. When you're talking about disruptive, you're talking about the impact, how it changes society when it's being adopted, which is something else. And those are the factors you're looking at when we are, well, differentiating the types of innovation. But that's not really what we should talk too much about. We should talk about making innovations, and then afterwards we will measure what kind of innovation we actually made. But we should focus on innovation activities, processes, management system, and innovation, which is new or changed entity realizing or redistributing value. And the redistributing part is that it normally kills an existing offering in the market, takes value from this, and then redistributes this within the new offering. Now, what is interesting to also notice is that most successful firm has some sort of management system, which establishes structures or way they're doing things. And with part of this is that they have a joint terminology to support their policies, so they can communicate. And the same goes for innovation. And we can build management system approaches on innovation as well. When we know we can manage and what we manage innovation activities. And sorry for the background noise. She got happy and started singing when she noticed there was more candy on the mattress. So that's always interesting. I think we could move to my next slide. So to finish on time, there's 3 takeaways, and I think I'll just focus on the questions part. Is that I'm on LinkedIn. Please add me if you want. If you find it relevant, we could follow up. I assume there's a lot of questions afterwards. We'll take them there. The OECD Oslo manual, which I mentioned, is also there, so you could look at the link there and you can find it. And also the OECD, and since when you got my slides, you copy the links and put it in the chat. You can also find all the definitions from ISO, searchable, clickable, and you can look at it online. It's for free. It's just the fundamental chapters, which goes deeper into the content and describes the differences of creativity, innovation activities, and so on, with examples which you cannot access, which you have to pay to get access to. but the definitions you can access. And I think I'll just stop there and leave everything else for the discussion. And I hope everybody see crystal clear definition is essential, and then we could just take it from there. And I'll be quiet. That's a bit difficult for a person from my part of Norway, but I'll try.
Well done, Magnus. Brilliant. Thank you very much, because you've done a really quick sort of whistle-stop tour, and we're really only focusing on one or two terms: innovation, innovation management, innovation activity, rather than trying to cover all of terminology. But hopefully it provides a picture of what we have to do at ISO level and why, what the value of doing that would be. Now, I know I've got a few questions, because I always do, but this would be the time if anybody wants to put up their hand for questions they would like to ask. But I think I might start in the first instance with Charlie.
That's not Charlie. If
No.
anybody else heard that participant leaving.
Yeah.
So he started with me. I didn't even have my hand up, Owen. So it's lucky I've got a question, isn't it?
I trust you.
Thank you for that, Magnus. That was really interesting. I suppose I think it was a couple of slides ago where you were sort of talking about that, sort of people shouldn't necessarily worry about trying to do that slide there, be radical, look for radical innovation or incremental innovation. One of the early discussions that I would tend to have with any organization is, what's their appetite? How radical do they want to be? But from what I'm taking from what you're saying is that instead of doing that, it might be better for us to better understand the opportunity, the challenge that they're trying to address, and not actually worry how radical, incremental, or somewhere in between the ideas are that solve that. Am I getting that right?
Yes, because what you kind of lose sight of when you're focusing on being radical, which municipalities in Norway want, they want to be radical. They can't be radical. There's too many laws. It's actually close to impossible. It's completely nonsense. But that's political communication. Now, when you want to implement that, you need to look at where can they be? Well, they got a lot of standards and process and procedures, and they can innovate them, meaning they could do something I see as an iterative change. But the impact in value, meaning the save time, or the, let's say, how much more happy people are when not doing unnecessary work, when that's implemented in a new or let's say improved process. That is innovation. It's a process innovation. That is innovation. And you're looking at radical, well, you kind of lose sight of where the value is generated. You kind of skip over it. And if you're trying to do that radically, if you try to implement a radical procedure in the organization, you lost half your organization. Good luck. You need to be radical.
Yeah. No, I thank you for that, because it's one of the challenging discussions I have with the support agencies especially in Northern Ireland, where innovation support equals invention, startups, it's early stage, it's all that sort of stuff. And what I've struggled to do is communicate the importance of the incremental changes within the programs that deliver. It always is part of the picture. So I think this slide and the way you talked about that is a really useful way to be able to communicate that to people that think innovation equals invention, and to break down some of those barriers.
And that's interesting, because when you mention invention, that is something completely different. That's just something new.
Yeah.
So I have a problem, okay, and I have a solution, and I make the solution work. That's the invention. Now, the moment I take that invention and I start marketing it, and then people start adopting it, making use of it, then it's an innovation, because now it's being used and it generates value. But before that, is an invention, it's a potential innovation. And then, for God forbid, not including patentable invention. That is something else. That relates to invention that fulfills some legal requirements for legal protection, but that's something completely different.
Yeah.
So you could, if you have on a pathway, you could say you have an idea, you conceptualize the idea, you have an innovation concept, you describe some attributes about it, then you end up with a invention, which is a potential innovation. It's a solution to the problem, which technically works, but may or may not be adopted and used and make value. But those are different things.
Yeah, so unless you're realizing value from the invention, it isn't innovation. It's just a great idea that has no purpose. And Catherine's put point in there that innovation, there's a similar argument there that innovation equals R&D. And that's the same sort of similar discussion to I'm having, where I'm trying to break that down. So that's a really useful insight. So thank you. Owen, I'll hand back to you there. You have your hand up.
I did. I was going to link what you were talking about there back to something else that Magnus said, which was that there is common ground with OECD and ISO, but the OECD has its different role, different remit. And for example, in the Republic of Ireland, I have often encountered public servants who are far more familiar and comfortable talking about something if it's on the radar of OECD, or if it's information published by OECD, because they see ISO as being only for the private sector, which is dreadful. And that's partly ISO's fault, because they haven't done a good job of communicating what they're trying to do. The principles of any management system, which was something that came up in an ISO WG meeting yesterday, which I can still remember because it's seared into my brain. But with that as a background, if you talk to someone in the public sector, what are they interested in doing? They're interested maybe in supporting maybe an organization, maybe, who's going to do what? Who's going to do some innovation activities. Most supports from public sector are not designed to ensure success from innovation, value and impact. And the public sector have that same problem when they're trying to figure out what innovation means for the public sector. So one, the public sector have the challenge of, if they look to OECD, then they'll be validated in their choice to support activity, but not outcomes, not impacts. And two, the public sector needs to innovate. And if they're only thinking about the activities, because that's the framework from OECD, they can't achieve the success. They simply can't get to where they want to get to. And I know, Catherine, you're exposed to that directly. Other people might be as well. We do have a couple of public sector people here today, but the majority are from everywhere and anywhere. Catherine, any thoughts on the public sector?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, I think if you took innovation out, because I think it creates a certain degree of pressure. If you called it revision or change or refresh or whatever you call it, there's a certain, maybe it's cultural and perhaps it's also political, because innovation is celebrated when it's radical. And the little bit of incremental change sometimes is otherwise classified as doing your job. So they're rewarded for just keeping the trains running and a little bit more. To go in anything that might be a stretch or characterized as radical comes with political risk and budgetary risk, as it is in every organization. But in a public service organization where the demand and the scrutiny on taxpayers' money is extreme, it creates an additional barrier. But I think calling it, sometimes the terminology, and it was interesting, Magnus, when you said that to use more, it's you're managing a process, you're managing a project, you're managing a whatever. It makes it a little bit more digestible. I think innovation sometimes can serve to stop or think that it has to be done in some fancy way, that in a public sector environment, that can be really challenging.
So Magnus, if you go back to the word innovation and this example, the public service, how have you found, or do you have thoughts on the best way to talk about innovation with the public service or for the public service?
Well, there's a few things. One is that we need to agree on what innovation is, and that they all use at least the Western world and most of the world actually, they use the OECD OSDO manual as the backbone to reporting. They report on what you invest in innovation, and their problem is that, and that's how they say innovation, I should do like this, is that they're not reporting how much you actually invest. Because if they're looking at the activities that support the likelihood of bringing forward new innovations, they would have reported a lot more, meaning they have done a lot more innovation, meaning they are more innovative, which is good for them. which is reporting back. So if they're looking at what you're actually doing, which supports innovation, which are innovation activities as part of the processes, they are much more innovative than they think they are. And they could put a figure on how much they've been spending. That's what the OECD does. And then you could look at the impact of that. And then you should start looking at not only the financial outcome, but also any other benefit we generate from it. We could also look at, we said value, and then in how long time span, because if you look at saving the planet, if you have an innovation which makes use of something which is not really sustainable, in the long run, that was not a innovation at all. That was a nightmare because it caused the downfall of mankind. So what's really the nuclear bomb and the nuclear reactor innovation? Potentially technology progress. So that's also you're going to look at in how long time do you see it as generating value or being negative. So that's a part of it. So part of you actually reopen the work on the innovation. We're going to add to address exactly what I said now: ethical innovation, sustainable innovation, circular innovation. So we can be precise on that as well. And then it would be easier for everybody to look at it. And also from a governmental side, if you look at those bodies, if you want people and you want to build an innovative culture, you need to look at what you do and show that you actually are innovative and report back so people feel proud and see that you're actually doing something. And when you see that we've been innovative for a quite long time, we just called it something else. That's the power of terminology. You'd put the appropriate label on and say, we are actually innovative. You guys are extremely good. And now you're bragging about your people. That kind of brings forward a smile, and you get a culture, and people see that this is nice, and you start implementing. And then when you start adopting your new procedures, new ways, and it generates value for the public, meaning saving money, or it's easier when you're getting more digital with services because the public save an insane amount of time. That's good. You could trace people with Corona. It makes it easier when we need it. And then looking in if Corona passes are innovation or not, I'm not going to go into that. But at the moment when we start tracking, so we could track how it spread, then that was a necessity at least. And then how you sold it after, that's a different matter. I'm not going to go into that nightmare. Very
good. Charlie, I think it's your turn, definitely.
Yeah, I was going to pick up on the kind of different terms that are used, because I mean, innovation is, I'd be interested in kind of see across the audience people's perceptions, but innovation is becoming such a dirty word. It's becoming meaningless. It's overhyped. You say the word innovation to people and they just roll their eyes and go, oh God, not that again. So now I'm seeing lots of tenders, lots of requests for work coming all under the banner of digital transformation. Digital transformation is one kind of innovation, but it's the latest shiny thing that everybody's gravitating to and going, oh, and we need to do this. Next year, it'll be another term that everyone's saying, but it's fundamentally, it's the same thing. We did digital transformation 25 years ago, but we just didn't call it that at the time. No, so this is a good question, a difficult question for you potentially. Have you come up with another word to describe this stuff other than innovation, which we can actually start a new trend and get rid of the word innovation completely and replace it with something better?
Well, if you call innovation, that is a necessity because it's something new that has a degree of newness or novelty, which generates value. So that is good. But if we really need all the other uses of innovation, that's a different matter. It depends on the context of the organization. And some organizations will call it technology development, and they call it a technology development project. Okay. In other organizations, that would be called an innovation project as part of their innovation portfolio. That is a matter of terminology for the purpose of communicating something. But that depends on your context. Brilliant. But the problem is that what we're ending up when we're hollowing out the words, and I'm saying word, not the concept, because that is more precise, is that we're entering the realm of bullshit bingo. And when bullshit bingo hits, while communication is difficult and you get people rolling their eyes and you're not getting anywhere and you already lost communication before you actually said anything. That's the problem. So that's why we shouldn't try to invent something new. When you look in academical paper, and I could have a meeting with a academical professor who's now, that's a kind of a contradiction itself, a professor who is an academic, obviously, who is way better than me in innovation, the subject field of innovation. I could pulverize them because they're also insanely inconsistent, because they use innovation if they talk about the policies, culture, processes, the flow of things. They just sparkly use the word innovation. So I really can't extract what they're talking about, and those assessing the articles don't know what they're actually measuring, and you end up with something, and that's, well, it's not good. And if I want to communicate and do an innovation project across different departments of an organization, or across countries, or across cultures, that's interesting. You're not going to succeed. You're not going to have an effective work with innovation at all. You're going to have an epic failure. Just to put you kind of in the context, how much time did we use to put up a set of definitions? We used 7 years. But I had 65 countries. I had 200 experts. We had liaisons with executives of the World Trade Organization, WIPO, or most of the UN organizations like UNESCO. We had a World Bank on executive level. We had those in charge of this. We had a EPO. We had a USPTO. We had China's patent office. We had the OECD, which we closely cooperated with. That took 7 years. Now, if you to align all of those, and if you start from scratch and you're one organization and then the sea of millions of organizations, and you want to put up a tender of being innovative, you're not going to get through. It's just going to be an insane amount of mess. But if we all can kind of start adopting what we've constructed, and we're going to improve it, that's the purpose. We're going to improve it every second, every third year. We might actually be succeeding, and I would say reverse the Tower of Babel effect. We're actually going to be able to innovate into the sky. Brilliant. And this time, nobody can make it crash.
Great answer. Could I say, just remind people, I'll defend, if you like, the work we're doing in ISO can frustrate the hell out of people involved in it, and Charlie and Catherine and Magnus and everybody else here, but it is innovating. It's just innovating at a slow pace that's sometimes hard to see. But the flip side of that is, as Magnus just emphasized, you get the whole world behind you. You get at least the prospect of crystal clear, or a far better basis, a far better platform for future acceleration. Softly, softly, catchy monkey, or hasten slowly, as we might say in Latin. Now, we have Shane and then Aileen. So Shane, over to you.
I find this whole discussion of terminology and language is really, really interesting in this space. And what I find happens a lot is, and perhaps this is why terms come in and out of favor, is that, a group of people who genuinely want to innovate, as in genuinely do something that is new and different to varying degrees. And you define all this terminology you said about doing it. Then in the background, there'll be a whole load of other people who go, there's money to be made in this innovation lark. How about we just call what we're already doing innovation? And that happens all the time. And then the term becomes devalued, and then you look for a new term. So I had a chat with a group of people just the other day where we were talking about a subset of this, which is, what is an idea? And just give you an example of the first of all, huge struggle to answer the question in any kind of simple way. But the range where, on one end you had an idea is a solution to a problem. So, okay,
that's an invention.
Yeah, but it's also accounting, if you want it to be. Like, there are many problems which you can solve without needing to do anything new. So calling an idea a solution to a problem is too general in my view. Then one of the people came up with a beautiful definition, which was, it's a kind of magic that doesn't require you to believe in anything. And I thought, okay, I like that.
Well done.
But even beyond that, and I know maybe this audience will find this thought difficult, my view is that one of the most useful definitions of an idea or an innovation when you first come in contact with it is how you react to it emotionally. In other words, if it doesn't either scare or excite you, then it probably isn't anything different. I just wonder what you think of that.
If I could just look at what is an idea. An idea is actually a mental picture of something, but that's it. So if an idea could be, I got a hunch, I want to take this bowl of water and pour it over my head. That is an idea. Now, what is starting to be a value, it would be when I conceptualize the idea into something, I have an innovation concept. Now, I started out with an idea because I observed a problem, and then I may conceptualize that into something. When I try to figure out how it can be solved, looking into how we could create an invention. But then I have an innovation concept. I looked into the needs for it. I looked into different attributes, what exists. But then I conceptualize the idea into something. And then that could be an invention, and hopefully that at one point ends up being an innovation. But without understanding what an idea is, you're lost.
And to me, it's interesting how difficult most people find to conceptualize what that is.
Yeah.
Brilliant for that, Magnus. Shane, that was really good value. I think we can grab a hold of that question. Do we react to it? If we don't react to it, maybe it's not black-white, is it innovative? But how likely is this to be really novel, really valuable, really worth pursuing? And if we're not reacting to it emotionally, we're not going to bother putting time into it. So there's some of those things that are, I think people won't argue with you, and some of the rest would make for a delicious argument. We might come back to that one over a pint. Aileen, I think it is definitely your time.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. Sorry I was late to join the party today, but how are you, Magnus?
Hey.
So I suppose listening to the really interesting conversation around language and just in my own experience, someone who's been around innovation probably around 7 or 8 years, and back when I was working for a public agency, Bordish Givara, we put a lot of time and effort into trying to figure out the whole innovation thing, and we also then said, right, well, we needed to define it, and that was our starting point. We had to lay out our stall as to what we were and were not doing. So once we got that definition down on paper, like we weren't going to revolutionize anything, but we were doing 3 clear things, and we were able to communicate that message both out to our clients, both up to our leadership team, and within our own team as well. So it was like, and it was all centered around value for us at the time. It wasn't centered around creating a better service or time, because we were more, client facing. But once we had that definition, it just became our mantra, and everyone straight away understood, well, if you're not hitting any of these 3 points, if we're not increasing the size of our raw material, if we're not decreasing our costs, or if we're not increasing our end value, then we're not doing it, So it made everything much clearer, and we were able to write our playbook of innovation, centered around those, 3 elements. So it definitely was worth putting the time in at the start to define, well, lads, what are we actually doing? And it made that communication message both up and down the channels much easier, which in turn secured our funding every year, because we were then able to report back on, well, our service is ultimately responsible for, X amount of value on the marketplace. So just a little point, definitely worth considering.
Great case study, great story, Aileen. Magnus, do you have a quick comment? And I've got one quick question.
Yeah. So totally agree. You need to start out with terminology in an organization to get anywhere. And I know your work because we use some of your work in the ISO. So that is actually really good work. So that's good. But in any organization, you want to create an innovation culture. If you want to get the organization to taggle along, you need to start with what is innovation, what does that mean for us, and what do we do with it? And you need to get the organization on board. So you need to look in the context, actually do something and adopt the the definition and make it yours. Without that, nothing's happening. You got no culture, no initiatives, no nothing. So totally agree. And yes, you guys did a great work.
That's Bordishkiwara, everybody, in case you didn't hear it the first time. Aileen will be giving a lecture tour. Her charge will be, what, 5,000 per lecture, is it, Aileen? Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my God, why did I ever leave?
Yeah, exactly. So thanks for that, Magnus, and thank you, Aileen. I have a very quick question for you, Magnus. I went back to the slide. I kept the slides up. Apologies, everybody, if it was in your way visually. I'd love to hear your thoughts and maybe some other thoughts. The words on this slide. Which one gives you, or do you think deserves the most attention because it causes the most problems?
Innovation process. Because what the problem is when those doing innovation is that they don't look back on what they did. So there's no learning. They need to look at which activities they did, and they could see what kind of activities could you have skipped and which one should you have added. And the next time you could have a blueprint of a initial linear process, even though it's not, but it's a starting point. So you got at least things you should have done. And then you would iterate around that and you make your own map along those activities. And then you end up with the process you actually made. But then there's a point for learning, because all organizations should be learning organizations. And if you're not a learning organization, you're really not an innovative organization because you're not learning. So that is essential. So I would say innovation process, because it's the processes and its activities you're managing. And without the process, you're not managing anything.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Magnus. I do have one more question, but Charlie, I wonder if you'd like a comment or to dive in before I do.
It was really actually just going to pick up on Aileen's point, and it was just a similar experience. I mean, it was the end of 2013. I was given the innovation brief for a UK PLC, and the brief was make us more innovative. That was it. That was the scope of what we were supposed to do. And it's no word of a lie. It took us 6 months to work out what they actually wanted done, whether it was new products, incremental improvements, new acquisitions, whatever it was. It took us 6 months to work out what innovation meant to the organization. So as my point is that I suppose whether you agree with the definition given by ISO or you disagree with it, it's probably critical for anyone looking to innovate to have a definition that works for them within their own context. And as we put in the chat earlier on, one person's innovation is another person's business as usual. So while I think I admire the intention of having a single definition of innovation, I feel every organization needs to have their own variation on that makes it meaningful for them and the context they're working within. So no question in there, Owen. Sorry, just an observation.
I have a question, and your contribution was a perfect link, because my question was right from the start of the session for Magnus, but also for others in this room. What do you say to an organization that wants to define innovation and digital transformation or all this other stuff for themselves, but not take account of the global accepted definitions or understanding?
Good luck.
I think I sympathize and empathize. I recognize, and I am that soldier. That's, our mission, should we choose to accept it, part of it is communicate where the common ground is, and to emphasize, like Shane said and like Charlie said, this is the common ground. That's not the end of it. Build on it, but don't ignore it, because then you end up in the realm of the Tower of Babel. That's a big part of all of our jobs as professionals. Personal opinion. So Magnus, brilliant. We're not on the end line. So if someone has a final question, brilliant. We have a couple of minutes, but I think we're broadly done for the day. And Charlie, it's probably just time to talk about what's upcoming in terms of Innovate Ireland.
Yeah, I can do. So I just want to pick up on Paul's comment there in the chat. Is innovation relative primarily to your peer group? Should there be something like levels, as in CMMI, the capability maturity model? Is there a scale of innovation that people potentially could work against? Sorry, Paul, if I've miscommunicated your question or your point. So I don't know if you want to take a minute on that, or will I just crack on there, Owen? Whatever you prefer.
Okay, spot on. So what is interesting with that is that exactly what they showed. A standard is a reference document, and then you need to embrace a starting point and make it yours, meaning given your context, you need to make your wordings of it, because the definition is unusable. It's too precise. It's not communicatable. You need to make it into communicatable language, layman language. We're making a document for that, but that is really hard work. And then you need to define for you what is incremental and for you what is radical, because it depends on you. And you don't have to compare that to others. It's for you. So you could put up your own, you could kind of address the scale to yourself. If you're a public organization, radical, well, that's up to you. But define in a way you got your organization tag along. If you look at a management system standard, one of the bummers for people do, and one of the essential part is context. You need to look at the standard, and then you adjust it through the mirror or the glasses of context, and you got your own concept. Without context, you're lost.
Thanks,
yeah, I think that's great. I think a lot of people do miss that with standards. They think it's a definition of what they have to do, and it kind of is what they have to do, but not how they have to do it. And how you do it is interpreted in terms of how you use it as a framework to build upon. So that's a really key point to end up on. Are you ready? Are you okay for me to close, Owen, or is there something you wanted to say before?
Just to say one more thing. Well, we need to say thank you, and I know you'll do that again in a second, Charlie. Magnus said at the end of his little talking piece, put the links up. So I did put the links up in the last few minutes for ISO and for Magnus himself. So they're in the chat. You can follow each and all of those as you're in the mood. And I have to say, Magnus, this conversation, sometimes it can sound a little theoretical. We're talking about Latin, but we're talking about how important it is to have the Latin there and then to build on it and to make sure that we can collaborate and cooperate to produce value. So priceless from my perspective. Really well done, much appreciated from me. Thank you very much, and from all of us here. And in terms of closing out for the day, Charlie, over to you.
Yeah, so again, just echoing that, thank you to Magnus. Really interesting and provoked a lot of conversation. So thank you for everybody for joining in, for the comments, for taking part today. For the regular Innovate Islanders, next week we're actually going to dig a little bit deeper into our plans for 2022 and sort of break down some of the themes that we're looking at into actionable activities. So we're really keen to get the members involved in shaping what that looks like. So if you look out for more of that sort of coming through on LinkedIn over the next few days, we'll be doing that the next 2 Fridays. The links, Owen, if you put the links into the post, I'll post the video that we've done. If you can put the links in after that for everybody, so they're available within LinkedIn. And then really just to say thank you again to everyone for coming along today, and have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you very much.